Welcome back for the last three kingdoms, the big ones. Today we are going to be talking about kingdom fungi. Uh, these are where our funguses come from. They fall into the unicellular and multicellular organisms. So there are unicellular funguses like yeast. Lots of yeast function separately and individually. And then we also have multicellular funguses like mushroom and other funguses like that we might see around. So they are really interesting. Funguses, they are heterotrophic still, but they are heterotrophic in a very specific way. They use absorption in an interesting way to eat. So as opposed to other organisms, well, let me talk about that in a second. I see that it's already. They typically lack mobility, although motility. They're sessile. That means they don't move. Let's just say don't move. Don't move on own. Now that's typically true, although there are occasionally some examples that have spores, and those spores do have flagella to help them move around. They have cell walls that include chitin. Chitin is a strong and flexible material. We also find it as a naturally occurring material in insects and crustaceans. And I always find that very fascinating that the animal kingdom and the chemical kingdom, there's only so many options out there in terms of what a living body can produce. And so there is only so many different chemicals that are out there, and some chemicals have better properties or are good properties for certain functions, like being a flexible skeleton for whether it be for a fungi or for an animal. So it's an interesting example of independent evolution, whether the chitin formed in the fungus or whether the chitin formed in an animal, like a bug. They also form these hyphae, and that's like a major structure in many of the multicellular funguses. They're these thread-like filaments, and they make up the bodies of multicellular fungi. So multicellular fungi might look like they have multiple sort of organs, and they do, but they don't have multiple tissues really. They have a single type of tissue, this hyphae, and the hyphae is these long threads. So you can see these sort of long threads, and all the threads kind of weave together. And then as they are woven together, they kind of form these different structures uh, inside of that look like they're made of different tissue, but they're actually made of all the same type of cell. This is different from our human bodies, right? Human body has different cell types in different locations. Even plant bodies often have different cell types in different locations. If you look at the bark or you look at a leaf, you'll see very different cells in those different areas. This is not the case in fungi. Fungi can have what looks like a multi-part organism, but it has the same type of cell throughout. The bulk of the body of the fungus actually will be underground hyphae that are embedded inside the material, weaving their way through, and only in certain situations do they actually combine together and form up to make these fruiting bodies. And these fruiting bodies are dedicated particularly to reproduction. Now, so that's the fruiting. And so we call this underground hyphae the mycelium. All right, so that's all just kind of interesting stuff. I do want to kind of attract some attention to the idea that they have these very simple bodies, sort of not so they have different, like they have many organs or structures, organs or structures, but mostly 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 one cell cell type hyphen. All right. And so that's kind of interesting. It's a little bit different from what we'll talk about when we talk about plants. Plants have lots of different cell types even in the same organism. Now, the other unique factor of the fungi is that they digest their food before they ingest. think about yourself. You take food, you put it inside your body, break it down, and then absorb it. But with the fungi, they actually excrete, they secrete enzymes. So they send enzymes out of their cells, and those enzymes break down the organic material, and then that allows them to absorb it. So if we, this brown, this gray here, that can be thought of as the enzyme. So we can, if we get really in here, we can think that, I'm not sure how I'm going to draw this, it's so small, but the enzymes are being secreted. So enzymes, maybe I'll just call it, like, do this. Enzymes are secreted. Okay, I'm going to try typing. It doesn't like that. Okay. So let's just highlight that part here. So all of this would be enzymes. Enzymes that are being secreted into the plant that they're growing on. So maybe this is part of a bark, right? Like let's put this as a part of a tree. So this is the bark of a tree, you know, so something like that. So this is our tree bark. So in this zone where there's enzymes, uh, here, enzymes digest the bark, and then the hyphae absorb the digested material. So they really break down the material outside of the cell, and that's kind of the interesting part. Is they're breaking down the material outside of the cell, and then the cell just has to absorb that raw material. And that's quite a bit different from any other organism we've talked about yet. Well, yeah, I would say it's pretty much different from all of them. Now there are this is one of the ways this idea of the hyphae and things like that. This can be like one of the ways like a foot fungus could be really damaging. The foot fungus might look like it's localized in one spot, but the fungus is actually woven into the cells of the skin, and it's sending out this chemical into the local area where that foot fungus is located, and then digesting the material there and damaging the flesh around the fungus. Also, when we look at something like a mold that's growing on your bread, some people will just cut away the mold and then start eating the bread. And while this might be safe enough, it is likely that you are still eating that mold because the mold is putting out fibers, and unless you cut a large enough section away, you won't be able to tell where those fibers have gone because those hyphae are microscopic really. So you're not going to be able to see them. They're just going to be woven into your bread and at some distance away from the fruiting body, which is probably the colored part. So one of those a little blue spot of mold there, you could actually have. Now it depends on what kind of fungus it is. Obviously, if it's a single-celled fungus, that you might not have that same issue. It could be more localized. There are lots of different types of funguses. I just want you to get an appreciation for the role that fungus plays in the world. So there are saprophytic fungus. These are ones that eat dead waste. They're really important to the life cycle of your ecology. Without these funguses, you can't recycle that waste very easily. There's also parasitic funguses, not quite as useful for us, but they absorb nutrients from a living cell or a living organism called the host. And then there's the mutualistic ones, which are interesting, and these are useful. These ones are positive, have a positive effect on the organism they are embedded in. So lichen is an example of a very mutualistic organism. So here you can see the fungi drawn out with the lichen here in yellow, but in the lichen it has algal cells. So algae here, those are not funguses, right? These are chromistas, organisms. So algae cells are going to be chromista organisms. So it actually has a separate kingdom living inside of it, and those are just similar in so many ways uh, to the endosymbiosis that we discussed in the last video. We have algae cells that can reproduce and then get picked up and protected by these fungal cells. And together they can work together to stay alive. The algae cells produce excess they in the lichen. So I'm just going to do a little bit on lichen here. We don't need this. We can get rid of that. Get rid of that. Okay, so the lichen, we have the algae cells produce sugars. Uh, the excess is shared with the fungal cells, and the fungal cells uh, hold in water even in direct sunlight, keeping the algae alive. So typically we think about algae. We think if you're like me and you think about an algae, and I don't know if you do, but in when I think about algae, I think about how how algae are really found in water. Like it's a water, it's an organism found mostly in water. And so I don't really expect to see algae anywhere else except in a aqueous environment. But in this way, the fungus can protect the algae, help it stay moist, allowing the algae to function because algae use photosynthesis. They need water to activate that photosynthesis. So that will be an essential part of keeping them going. Okay. So next, let's talk about the next one here. So we have some beneficial fungi. So there is the story of penicillin. Penicillin is a fungus that was derived from a fungus, and so it is now used as an antibiotic. It's really important. Claviceps purpurea is also used. It's also is also a fungus that has been used to derive a high blood pressure medicine out of. That is also used for controlling excessive bleeding and promote contractions during childbirth. It's really essential. It's actually thought to be uh, extremely essential to modern birthing. And without it, there would be so many births that would have not happened because they couldn't induce childbirth any other way. So this is all based on this first concept here about the idea that fungi produce these enzymes. So when in natural products chemistry, so fungi are often studied for their unique enzymes, which have lots of interesting applications in medicine. So lots of you'll see every couple of months or so they'll talk about a fungus derived medicine for cancer, a fungus derived medicine for this or that or this. And it's all because these funguses are really good at producing these enzymes, and enzymes are essential to the function of cells. And so if these funguses are producing interesting enzymes that are unseen anywhere else in the world, they could be used in our own bodies. This is an interesting application of biodiversity, right? Thinking about biodiversity not just about the ecology, but we could also think selfishly about how biodiversity can improve life for humans. By knowing and having and retaining biodiversity of funguses, we retain the ability to go searching for these unique enzymes that we could never have imagined in the lab, we could never have created. Here is an example of the fungus cell. Notice it's a sort of lack of shape, similar in a way to uh, the the animal cells we described, although it does have a cell wall. And you can see the cell wall here, and it has chitosomes, which I believe are there to help produce the cell wall. Those are producing chitin. Um, then they're unique to that cell. It has the centrosome that we suggested was only in animals, um, but is also in these types of cells. And we also have the Golgi apparatus, the reticulum, the nucleus, the vacuole. But look how big that vacuole. So we have a large vacuole like plants, and so this is large like in plants, but the centrosome like in animals. So it definitely has features that are interesting and separate and different. And this is the chitin wall. Chitin, unlike plants. So definitely not a plant, although it's not quite an animal because it definitely has this interesting cell wall. Okay, so let's compare that to Kingdom Plantae. Here you can see an even more, you can look in this one, you can see that I grabbed this one for the web. But you can look and see some of the ways that this is one that is budding and cell dividing, and we can see some of the interesting sort of factors that it shares. Okay, so feel free to go back and take a picture of that. Now, Kingdom Plantae, these are more than 250,000 species of plant out there. They are all multicellular. Their cell walls contain cellulose, which provides it rigidity and strength, more so than the chitinous ones, which are flexible. They may contain chloroplasts, or most contain chloroplasts, which makes them photosynthetic, which makes them autotrophic. Um, now, I will say that there are a few that have heterotrophic abilities, but we should mention that even the Venus flytrap, a famous plant for eating flies, does not need to eat flies. It does so to support its life, but it is not essential that it eats the flies so much. It is a luxury to eat flies for it. So even the Venus flytrap gains the majority of its energy from chloroplasts. I think it's actually, boy, it's been a while, but I believe that the Venus flytrap is just getting some essential vitamins and nutrients and minerals from eating flies, not necessarily that it lacks in the soil, is my recollection. These cells are organized into tissues and sometimes into organs, which means that the cells themselves are specialized, unlike in the fungus. These organs might be things like the roots and the stems and the leaves, and they might even have tissues like specialized cells, and definitely have tissues which are these specialized cells for different functions, like vascular tissue that transports material, and then other materials that are better for photosynthesis. They don't really have mobility, although some have reproductive cells that have that flagella that they can send through the water. And there is evidence that they arrived on Earth at about 400 million years ago. So 4.6 billion years ago, that's when we have our Earth starting. We have about 500 million years ago where the Earth was filled with a variety of organisms, including archaea and bacteria, some algae, and some protists, as well as some animals like sponges and corals. And then at 400 million years, we have the presence of true plants. Biochemical and fossil evidence suggests the multicellular land plants and green algae share a common ancestor. The ancestor may have been able to survive periods of drought, which is kind of a characteristic of plants compared to algae. Algae can't survive outside of water, with the exception of lichen, but plants can. So when we had some natural selection over different periods of drought, then that resulted in these adaptations of plants. Today we have day plants, present day plants, and green algae share the following characteristics. They have the cell walls of cellulose, they have cell division that includes the formation of a cell plate, they have the same type of chlorophyll, and they have similar genes for their rRNA and cellular vesicles, but they are different because they lack the multicellular characteristics like tissues and specialized organs. Here's some examples of how plants have evolved. So here we have the ancestral green algae, which lead to the mosses and liverworts and hornworts. These are called non-vascular plants. They lack a vascular system. And then we have the vascular plants, which include your ferns, and then the two plants that produce seed, which is conifers and the flowering plants. And these are probably what you think of, I think of the most when I think about plants. But conifers, we of course have a lot of in Manitoba, where we have a lot of conifer plants. Yeah, evergreens and things like that. Okay, I'm at 21 minutes. All right, we're gonna push through Animal Kingdom. I hope you can stick in there. Feel free to speed up the video if you need. So Animal Kingdom, this is 1.5 million species. They're mostly, or they are all multicellular eukaryotes. If they're single-celled, they would go into the protozoans. Um, their common characteristics is that they consume organic materials, so that makes them heterotrophic. They typically breathe oxygen. Most are motile, that they can move. They reproduce sexually, for the most part, primarily sexually reproductive, and then they also grow from a hollow sphere of cells called a blastula during the embryonic development. Okay, that's a tough one. We'll talk about that in a sec. And their cells are organized into tissues, and the tissues are organized into organs, and the organs are organized into organ systems. So that's organization. So the blastula. I'm just going to briefly talk about blastula. I remember in my first year biology class, we spent a lot of time talking about this, so this is something to keep in mind just a little bit. The blastula is this idea that the cell, you've got one cell like this, that cell divides like that. And then that cell will divide into four cells. And then each of those cells will divide into two more cells, right? So we can kind of like, each of those would divide into two. And so now we're up to 16. If you take this set of 16, all of those over time will develop into two. And they kind of like, it's got to be three-dimensional. So we're kind of doing this, and you're going to do this and this and this. Well, over time, it's just a big blob. And you've got like a big ball of cells. At some point, this ball of cells has to start becoming an animal. So the next step that happens is once you have the big ball of cells, then uh, then that cell becomes hollow on the inside. So see this space on the inside? Essentially, all the cells that are on the inside here slowly drift away they sort of compact themselves on the walls like this. And so then the inside becomes hollow. And then over time, this inside will start to change shape. And you can even have them pinch in, and they can form holes, and they can also start to form you, and as you are defined. So, it's a very complicated process, and I will link you to a video showing you how exactly that all works and fits together. But that's the concept that we're trying to get at there. I can't animate well enough to bother going in any deeper. Some common divisions that we talk about in the animal kingdom, and these are the characteristics. This is really, this is the key part, because we are talking about characterization, right? And we're all talking about defining organisms and categorization. So this is probably where you can stop kind of paying attention. As long as you can you can realize these are the key points and compare them to the other six kingdoms. That's the key. Some things that we also talk about in Animalia when we're dividing Animalia further, and we'll have another video on phyla that'll kind of be a little bit of an optional video. Uh, these divisions in Animalia are going to be about things like symmetry. How can the body be, how is the body divided? Is it divided down the middle like you and me? Is it divided in a circular way like a starfish, where the starfish have, you know, a similar geometry in all of these different directions? Or is it something like a sponge where it's kind of a random shape and it has sort of some holes over here and over here, but it's all random, asymmetric. There's also a discussion when dividing up animals into different sections about how that blastula develops. What kind of layers form in there? What do those layers do? And then we might look at how complicated features like spines and nervous systems. So that's everything I have to say about animals and plants and funguses. This is really the end of the majority of this unit. We're going to probably look into doing a project in the phyla. I also would like to look at the phyla because I think it's fun. Um, and so we'll spend a little bit of time next week on the phyla and doing maybe a project on them. But this is really, we're pretty much at the end of this booklet, and we'll start to work on the next unit after this, shortly after this. All right. Thanks for paying attention and have yourselves a great day.